Hello, everyone. Welcome to Contemporary Web Design 2, Week 7. In today's class, we will learn about MongoDB, what it is, how we can connect to the database, and push some content onto the database. Let's get started. So, MongoDB is a NoSQL database. So, if you've ever looked into the different types of database, you'll see that there are NoSQL databases and SQL databases. What that means is that NoSQL, wait, maybe let's try to find a image to help with this. Um, yeah, perhaps this SQL versus non-SQL. So in the previous classes, we've seen JSON objects, JSON files, they don't always have a particular structure per se. So if you, for example, in your coding challenge 4, if I'm not wrong, with the election results, you were provided with different JavaScript object notations, JSON files, and you modified a value, you added a key and a value to those JSON objects in your coding challenge, right? But if you were to add a key and value to one object and you don't add a key and value to another object, that's fine. One JSON object will not affect another JSON object, right? So when we work with MongoDB, the kind of objects that we store and push onto our database that don't necessarily require a structure, that is called um, no SQL. And when you work with SQL, perhaps in the future, you'll see that SQL is a little more stricter with rules. It's a structured query language, which means that there is a table. There will be one value, just like your Humber ID is your primary unique value when you're a student at Humber. Similarly, SQL will have a table in which each value will have its own unique ID, and there'll be certain rules or default values to be set in case a value is not available. So when you work with data in a more structured format, it's SQL, structured query language. And if you don't have that particular tabular structure, your data is a little more flexible, then that is your NoSQL databases. So what we are learning today, MongoDB, that is a NoSQL database, which means it doesn't follow an a structured query language paradigm. Now, if again the difference between SQL and NoSQL isn't properly understood, that's okay. We'll learn NoSQL this semester, and if you know SQL, you'll see the difference. Or if you do SQL in the future to learn, then you'll see the difference between that and NoSQL that we learn today. Okay, so the main advantage of NoSQL, as I said, it's not a structured query language, so it's very flexible and has a low barrier of entry. It pairs well with Node.js because Node.js is also like a flexible language that you can work with JavaScript and JSON end to end. So essentially, inside our MongoDB NoSQL database that we will connect with our Node.js application, we will pass JSON objects, which is why we learned about, and we'll make the connection using async await. We'll upload or push data that are JSON objects. We'll retrieve data that is JSON objects and so on. And that's what we'll do. So MongoDB has many products. The one that we will be working with is called MongoDB Atlas. Okay, so in your MongoDB databases, they hold in MongoDB, databases hold one or more collections of documents. Okay, so if this is your MongoDB database, it can contain many collections. Collections are a way of categorizing your documents. So, for example, maybe my database has two parts or two collections. It can have one for students, or maybe three. It can have one for students, one for professors, and one for other administrative staff. So those can be my three different collections. And within those collections each, if I add my data or your data as individual students, those will all be your documents. Okay. So inside your database, you'll have different collections of items inside which we'll have a document, which is a key and value pair list or array or nested document. So this might look a little, it might resemble a JSON object when we see it. And these objects are all categorized within different collections, and all of our collections together make up our MongoDB database. So MongoDB is a great general purpose document database designed for modern application. MongoDB stores JSON documents, and that makes it very simple for us to interact with our database. And the fields in a JSON document can vary from document to document, which means, for example, let me try to Okay, so for example, in one of our documents, let's say inside our database, we are trying to, inside collections, we are passing on student data, right? So we might have a JSON object where we have name. So name might be Jane, right? Then her Humber ID, so HID might be N something, right? And maybe the class that she's currently attending might be MMDD209, right? Um, let's say for some reason, let's say we have her date of birth also. Let's say 2 1999. Okay, so this can be my first object, and this will be what's in my database. But within this will be one of my documented objects. Okay, it's in a JSON format. The next JSON object that I have, it doesn't necessarily need to have all of these fields. Let's say a lot of the details are similar besides the Humber ID. So let me change that. Okay, and the name. So and maybe for this user, we don't have the date of birth. So for our first object, we have all of this information, and the second object doesn't necessarily have the same structure. And MongoDB will not reject the second value just because it doesn't have the user's date of birth. So my point being is, even though the structure of both of my objects are different, MongoDB will accept your data, and later on you'll just have to use or you'll have to call this data accordingly, keeping in mind that maybe some values in the database doesn't have the date of birth, perhaps, and you will get your results back in that same way. So, because of this flexibility when it comes to how your data needs to be structured, MongoDB is very friendly to use. Okay, it stores data as JSON documents, and the fields in a JSON document can vary from document to document, which means this one JSON document might have all of these fields and the other one might not. And if they vary, that's completely okay. MongoDB won't make an issue out of it. I don't want to save that. Okay, collections. So the first thing that we saw is the database. All of this information was about that. In MongoDB, the next part that we were seeing are collections. So MongoDB stores documents, these individual JSON documents in collections. In MongoDB, a collection is a group of documents. If you're familiar with relational databases, you can think of a collection as a table. Again, if you're not familiar with SQL, that's completely fine. Collections do not enforce a schema, which means, again, they are flexible. They don't force you to have certain rules on how you've structured your data in your collection. Each object can have different fields in the same collection, right? So the first step we'll do towards actually implementing all of this practically is creating a MongoDB Atlas account. So if you haven't already done so, open another tab and search for MongoDB Atlas. Okay, for this semester, we will be working with MongoDB Atlas and not any other product of MongoDB. Okay, so just search for MongoDB Atlas, ATLAS, and click this link that says MongoDB Atlas. In here, you need to sign in if you already have an account. Okay, you can sign up, or you can create an account from scratch. If you're following along with this recording, then pause over here till you go and create an account if you haven't already done so. I'm going to go ahead and sign in because I have my account. So, Jen, and login. Okay, fire hydrants. All right. No problem. Okay, what is happening? Got it. You don't have to set up multi-factor authentication. That's what I skipped over. Okay, so I'm not sure when you log in what page you will be redirected to, but that's okay. Let's all just click on this top left corner, which is like a leaf icon. Okay, and the top left corner, you have this MongoDB Atlas icon, which looks like a leaf. So when you click on it, it should, let me just make sure, clicking on it takes you to your projects page. Or even if you're not here right now, if you've logged in to the left of your, to your left side of your screen, there's a projects panel. Click on it and you should see nothing, okay, because we haven't created a project yet. So let's go ahead and click on new project. I'm just gonna go back to the PPT. Yeah, okay, just to make sure we are on track. All right, let's do it till here. Okay, so coming back to MongoDB, I selected the main organization home icon in the top left corner. And in here, under my projects, because I don't have one, we need to create one so we can integrate it and start adding, integrate it with our code and start adding some data to our database. Right, so I'm going to click on new project. You can name your, you can have your project name be anything. If there are any restrictions, then I'm sure it will prompt you. So it needs to be unique. So since this is our first project, that shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to name this week 7 dB and I'm going to hit next. Okay, the rest you don't have to change anything here. Just create project. And once you do create your project, one way to see it, or is of course we go back to your MongoDB Atlas home, and now you'll see that this project has been created. But when you do create your project, you might have been taken to a page that looks something like this, where you have the overview of your database. In the top left corner, right under your Atlas icon, you'll see your project name right here. Within this, we can create our database. So on in the left panel, go to database, click on it, and let's build a database. So you need to build a cluster inside your MongoDB database. Select the free option, okay, which is right here, and just give your cluster a name. Cluster is your collection of collections that we were seeing, right? So in MongoDB Atlas, essentially what we had is our database. Within that, we have our collections. Within that, we have our document. So all of our collections together will be in a cluster of our database. So let's give that cluster a name. Sorry. So I'm just again I'm gonna leave it be default. I don't want to change it. Maybe I'll just change it from cluster 0 to cluster, and the rest can remain the same. Again, make sure when you are creating your database that you select the free option. We haven't entered our card details, that was not necessary. So you shouldn't face any problems. Anyways, it's just that these other options might ask you to enter your credit card details, which again, not required for MongoDB. You had to do that for AWS, but for MongoDB, it's all free. So if you've done everything right, then this should let you proceed to the next page by clicking create, and this should say free. So I'm going to click on the create button. Okay, I have to, so much checking. Okay. Oh, all right. My browser really doubts me, I think. Okay. So now the first time when you're creating a database in your project, you will be required to set up a username and a password. Now this username and your password, especially the password, you need to make sure you either let it be something memorable or you save this randomized password that gets auto-generated. Okay, so for just to keep things simple, I'm going to change the password to test user123 with a capital U and let my username be this. We will be using this to have our code connect with our database. And once you've written the password, I'm not sure if there's a setting that you can go to change it. I think there might be, but you just should make sure that you don't forget your password in order to avoid any issues with your database. And if you have already populated your database, then it would be very bad to lose all that data. So just make sure you remember the username and password. And you'll have to do that just the first time when you're creating your database. And so that's the first part of it. The second part of it is IP addresses. So when you're working with MongoDB, it's going to ask you which all IP addresses does this database need to have access to. So when you're working with uh, a database like this, the benefit of setting this up is that outside of this, like currently, if I add my current IP address of the internet connection or my location that I right now have, it's added that to the access list. So if I change my location, right now I'm making this recording from home, but if I change my location and try to connect with the same database at college, perhaps it will not load my data, or it might give me an error because that location is not added to my access list. So in order to make sure that for now that your code works in our given environment, you just need to hit add my current IP address, and that'll get added to the access list. Okay. Um, okay, did we forget anything? Okay, just hit create user once you have added your name and username and password. And now once you've added the IP access list as well, so all that we did here was add our username, password, hit on create user. Scroll down and add your IP address. For our sake right now, because we might do some of this on campus, we might do some of this at home, I'll show you how to make this ready for all environments, and that will be important for when you host your MongoDB database along with Node.js on an AWS server. So of course, if you try to host your your website that's connected to your database on AWS so that others can access it as well, there's a good chance like AWS's environment or IP address might not be able to follow or connect with MongoDB. So what we need to do eventually is modify our settings so that our database is accessible by all networks. Okay, so for now, let's hit finish and close. Go to overview. And now you should be able to see that your database has been created if you just click on database in the top left corner. Okay, so inside this cluster, we can browse collections, and you'll see that it's currently empty because we haven't added any data, but our collection is ready, our cluster is ready. Just before we proceed, if you try to host your website that already has a connection with MongoDB, so if your Node.js application has a connection with MongoDB, okay, maybe you're displaying some data from your database, or you're trying to add some data to it. If you try to host it on AWS, you might have network access issues. So for this current project's database that I have selected, this cluster, I'm going to go to the left panel and select the network access option under security. In here, you can see that currently my IP address from where I am is the only one added to my list. But this will give me an error if I try to host this website online. So what I'm going to do is either edit or add an IP address. And in here, you should see an option to allow access from anywhere. So if you click on this, you'll see that this automatically got written. If you don't see this option, all right, I'm going to close this and get that again. Under my security tab on the left side panel, I have network access, right? Inside that, you can see that this is the current IP address that we just added. But if you want your database to be accessible from anywhere, even when you've hosted it on AWS, you go to the top right corner and select this Add IP Address option. In here, if you have the option to allow access from anywhere, click that button. If not, in your access list entry, just type 0.0 dot, like 4 times 0 with dots in between, / and another 0. What this specifies is that there's no specific IP address that is allowed. Any IP address of any range, any port can now access this database. Once you've written this in your access list entry, just hit confirm. And now our database would be accessible not only from home, but on college campus, in a cafe, wherever. All right. If we try to connect to a website that has this connection, has this database's access. So now that we have created our project up here in the top left corner, we have our database. We created a cluster, but our collection is currently empty. To populate it, let's see how we can use our Node.js app to run different queries to create, read, update, and delete. Okay, so CRUD, when you're working with backend, when you're working with databases, CRUD is a very important concept. Okay, they are the four essential actions that your database that you need to know how to work your database with or around. What I mean is that with every database, you need to be able to create an entry, you need to be able to read existing entries, you need to be able to update any entry, and if required, you need to be able to delete any entry as well. So that's what CRUD is for you. CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Very essential concept for backend, right? So we'll try to create a Node.js application and see how we can write queries to do all of this in our database, which is currently empty. As you can see, it has no information. Databases is zero, collections is zero because we have our cluster, but we have no collection created. As soon as we do that, this will work out or this number will get changed. Coming back to our PPT, we created a new project. We created a cluster for free. And now we need to integrate our database or the collection that we tried to create with our Node.js application. How do we do that? I'm going to open VS Code. Sorry, just give me a second. Yeah. So inside VS Code, I'm going to create a new folder. Let me check if I have provided a starter code in today's class code. So MMDD209 lesson plans. We are in week 7. Okay, I haven't. So I'm going to code from scratch. Uh, Now that we've created our MongoDB database, I want to connect it to my local Node.js application, right? So I'm going to create a new folder. We'll start from scratch. So let me create an empty folder. And again, I'll call it week 7 underscore Mongo. The name doesn't matter. And I'll open this empty folder in my database. You can see that Mm, this week 7 Mongo folder is open and there's nothing in here. So let's create an application. Okay, so I'm going to call it server.js. Okay, for now, that is it. Now, in my Node.js application, if I want to use MongoDB Atlas, then I'm going to have to open my terminal, right? So from my options, I go to my terminal and I create a new terminal. And in here, just like we did in our previous classes, if we want to use the MongoDB package, then you need to install it by typing in, even I forgot, one second, yes, npm install. So npm install, okay, so it's part of your slide here. So npm install, you don't have to specify the version. If you want to, you can, but I'm just going to type in MongoDB. So npm install MongoDB. That's what's written here. Okay, I'm going to hit enter in my terminal. And you'll see that we only created server.js, but now the node modules for our Node.js application and the necessary packages got installed. For today's class example, we don't need Express or EJS. All we needed was MongoDB, and that's sufficient for now. So I'm going to close my terminal, or just, yeah, close it, and we can get back to that later. Let's create our server and then see how we can connect MongoDB to it. So the first thing that we need to do is require or import the module that we just installed. So the first thing to do is import your MongoDB package. Let's do that. Const the way to import this is a little different. We don't want we want the Mongo client specifically from the MongoDB package that we've installed. Okay, we'll use this Mongo client variable to connect with our database. Okay, so this is client service. We're going to try to connect to our database and get, um, yeah, we're going to connect to our database and then we'll perform actions with it, right? So require Mongo MongoDB. Now, just like with your Node.js and Express.js servers, when we were creating, there's a certain anatomy, general beginner syntax that you have to follow. And thereafter, given your problem statement, you can add to it, build your code, and so on. So when you're working with MongoDB, specifically just MongoDB today, not Express or EGS. We are not doing templating. We'll just try to interact with our database. So in that case, you need to import this MongoDB modules Mongo client first, and we'll use this to make a connection with our database. How so? The next thing is we'll create a variable called with a const variable declaration because we don't want anyone to change this link later on. Okay. And I'm calling it URI. What is URI? Again, general anatomy and syntax that needs to be followed when you're trying to connect with your database. I'm going to open this a little, my browser a little bigger. And under the, when I click database, you can see that for our given cluster, there is an option before we browse collections, there's an option to make a connection. So we click on that and select the drivers option to connect to your application. In here, just go to, we have Node.js in our computer. We have just installed MongoDB. So we'll just move on to step 3. In step 3, there is this link that you have. You either select and copy it, or there is this shortcut on the right. Okay, so I'm going to copy it, go back to VS Code, and before my URI semicolon, this is what my, yeah, this is what my connection link is going to be like. So I've imported the MongoDB module and I have used this connection link that I got from MongoDB. Now, one thing that you might forget that you shouldn't is this. There is a placeholder currently by which you're supposed to substitute with the password that we created. So we just created a username and password. You need to enter that password here and not within the pointed brackets. You're supposed to remove the pointed brackets as well. So I'm going to erase it.